fair appraisal of Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington was neither a compromiser or an Uncle Tom. He needed to be totally reappraised by black people. He was one of the most brilliant educators this country has yet to produce. He was a strategist whose strategy did not always work. That requires something else and more than we got time for right now. But this set my mind in motion. I did not believe that I came from a people that had no history.
Now, what age was this when you were told this by this man?
Oh, I was about 15, 16. But I never accepted it. So one day, doing chores at the old Spencer High School in Columbus, Georgia, I never reached high school grade-wise. But the 7th grade in primary school was so large, and the high school was new and wasn't crowded. They put the 7th grade in the high school, and that's the way I reached high school. I spent one semester in high school.
What was it that prompted you to want to go to New York?
Searching for something better for myself and hoping that I would go to the World's Fair. But the main point I want to get across is that while doing chores, I had to hold the book of a recitalist, the book in the coats. And this recitalist had a book called The New Negro. And I read an essay by a black person with a German-sounding name, a black Puerto Rican called Arthur Schomburg. And the essay was called The Negro Digs Up His Past. That was the first essay I read dealing with the African people in ancient history. And that set me off. So that was the key. I had found it. And then
you wanted to know where this man was, and you heard he was up here.
I came to New York. A year had passed, and I thought he was some mysterious person in a temple, people guarding him to keep people from taking away his knowledge. About 19 now. And I went to the library one midday and asked one clerk in the lower floor, the old library then, do you know anybody who can give me a letter to see Arthur Schomburg? And the girl was short-tempered. It was lunch hour. She said, you just have to walk up 3 flights. And I walked up 3 flights. Arthur Schomburg was holding down the desk because his staff was on lunch hour. He said, come in, son. What do you want? And I sat down at his desk, and I wanted to know the whole history of the African people, henceforth, all of it within the hour. He said, sit down, son. He said, what you call African history, Negro history, nothing but the missing pages of world history. And then he told me something that has benefited me all my life. He says, son, go study the history of your masters. Study European history. Learn why your people were taken out of world history. And really, I began studying European history, then came back to African history. One of the reasons why I am so sharp with African history, I know the European background to it. And I know the history of the world before the European entry. I teach a course at Hunter College now called Dimensions of World History. It is 2/3 over before I come to Europe, because I'm teaching the 3,000 years before the European entered history. The European is the last of the major people to enter world history. He's late. Africa had 2 golden ages and was tired when the European entered. And when the European entered, they entered destructively. When the European entered, they entered fighting over the trade in the Mediterranean, and they entered crying out to destroy an African city and an African people that had never harmed them. Carthage, the destruction of Carthage, was the first aggressive European entry in history. Now I'm letting Alexander the Great off the hook. And why am I doing this? Because he sought a partnership between Greece and tired Egypt. He did not seek to destroy, but to seek a wedding between those 2 cultures. It would have been a poor wedding. It would have been a June and September wedding. It would never have worked. And if you look in the Egypt of today, and to see how those Greeks took the African statues and put Greek heads on them, it never would have worked. And how they claimed for Greece a lot of African accomplishment, it never would have worked. If you go to Karnak, then go to the Acropolis, you can see how the Greeks copied African architecture. And you can see how the Greek architect, you can see how the Greek structures are now in decay. And you go to Karnak, where they copied, and see totally intact, except for the roof. Those African architecture, those African structures built 3,000 years before Greece are still intact, which means those Africans built exceptionally well. You look at the African, not only the African basis of Greek architecture, but the African basis of Greek social thought. These were master builders.
Clarke, you say that you have in excess of 20,000 books here. What percentage of those would you say you've read?
I have read the portion of every book that is relevant to the work that I do.
How did you develop that knack? How do you know what part of the book is relevant? How are you able to skim and scan?
When you're teaching, you can pick up a book immediately, know exactly what portion that you need and what book you need to read from cover to cover, and what book you need to pick out and read, what portion you need to read right now.
What is it that you look for when you pick up a book for the first time?
First, I look at the index.
The index, all right. Why?
I look at the index because that tells me what's inside of it. And if the book hasn't got an index, then the book takes up a whole lot of my time unnecessarily.
All right, next.
I don't have much patience with books without indexes.
All right, so what's the next thing you look for? Do you look for the author to see what his credentials are?
What his point of view is and his reasons for writing. I know certain authors are bigots. I know certain authors have attitudes that I have to deal with. I have a book here by Phage. I know Phage is a bigot trying to cover up the true history of African history, but he's been attacked so much by a whole lot of people, including me. I know Phage is trying to change his tone and come into the African club. But he's still a bigot. But he wants legitimacy now in the new wave of revisionist African scholars who are getting new respectability by saying that Africans did have